and I'm the one who reads the fine print. That's what my daughter always said about me. Dad, you're the only person I know who actually reads the terms and conditions. She'd laugh when she said it. I'd laugh too. I thought it was a compliment. I still think about that now, how a man can be careful about everything. Every contract, every receipt, every word written in small letters at the bottom of the page, and still miss what's happening right inside his own house. My name is Marvin. Wait, no. Let me start over. People call me by my name every day. And I forget sometimes that this is a story I'm telling, not just a life I'm living. My name is Arthur. I'm 64 years old. I retired 2 years ago after 31 years working as a licensed electrician, mostly commercial work. Hospitals, schools, the kind of buildings where you don't get to make mistakes. I know wiring. I know systems. I know what things are supposed to look like and what it means when something looks different than it should. I live in the same house I bought with my late wife in 1998, Columbus, Ohio. 3 bedrooms, a garage. I converted into a workshop and a backyard that gets the best afternoon light you've ever seen in September. She passed 6 years ago. It's been just me since then, and I don't say that to sound lonely. I say it because it matters to the story. My daughter lives about 40 minutes away. She married a man named Derek. No, not Derek. His name is Brendan. They've been married for 9 years. They have 2 kids, my grandchildren, and I love those children more than I can put into words. Her name is Simone. She has her mother's eyes, and my mother's stubbornness, and I mean that as the highest possible praise. Brendan seemed like a good man when they first started dating. That's what makes this hard to tell. He wasn't loud about anything. He wasn't rude at the dinner table. He remembered my birthday. He asked about my health in a way that seemed genuine. I had no reason not to trust him. Last spring, for Father's Day, he gave me a gift. It was a home automation system, one of the newer ones. A hub device that sits on a shelf and connects to your thermostat, your lights, your locks, your security cameras if you have them. He'd already bought a camera package separately, 2 indoor units and 1 for the front porch. He said he'd been thinking about it for a while, said I was out here alone, and he wanted to make sure I was safe. Said he'd set the whole thing up for me himself. I thanked him. I meant it. Simone was standing in the kitchen doorway smiling, and the grandkids were already running around the backyard. And I thought, this man is trying. He is genuinely trying to take care of my family. We spent most of that Sunday afternoon on it. He knew exactly what he was doing, I'll give him that. He set up the hub, connected the cameras, walked me through the app on my phone, showed me how to check the live feeds, how to get motion alerts, how to adjust the sensitivity so the neighbor's cat wouldn't set it off every night. He even labeled each camera in the app: front porch, living room, kitchen hallway. I used the system every day after that. Checked the front porch feed in the mornings with my coffee. Got a few motion alerts that were just the mail carrier. It felt good, honestly. It felt like I was being looked after. 6 weeks later, my old friend Eugene came to visit. Eugene and I go back 40 years. We worked together in our 20s at the same electrical contracting company downtown. He went a different direction eventually, ended up in network infrastructure. Spent the last 15 years of his career doing IT security work for a regional bank. He retired about 18 months before I did. We have lunch every few months, talk about the grandkids, argue about football, the usual. He came over on a Tuesday. I made chili. He brought cornbread from that bakery on 5th that he knows I like. We sat at the kitchen table, the way we always do, and at some point I mentioned the new system Brendan had set up. Showed him the app on my phone. He looked at it the way he looks at everything, quiet, careful, not rushing to say anything. He asked if he could see the actual hub device. I showed him. It was on the shelf in the hallway, right where Brendan had put it. Eugene looked at it for a long moment. Then he asked to see my phone again. Then he asked me a question that I've turned over in my mind probably 100 times since. "Arthur," he said, "do you know who has administrator access to this system?" I told him I did. I'd set up my own account. Brendan had helped me with the password. Eugene shook his head very slightly, not dramatically, just a small, slow movement. He said, "That's not what I'm asking." He showed me, right there on my phone, how to navigate to the account settings. There was a section for authorized users. My account was there, and there was a second account, an email address I didn't recognize. Not Brendan's name, not any name at all, just a string of letters and numbers that looked like one of those generated addresses. Eugene said very quietly, "Someone else has been watching these cameras, Arthur. Full access. They can see the live feeds, they can pull the recorded footage, and they can change your settings anytime they want." I sat down. I'm not a man who panics. 30 years in commercial electrical work will teach you that panic is the most useless thing in any room. When something goes wrong inside a wall, you stop. You assess. You think. But I want to be honest here. When Eugene said those words, something dropped in my stomach. Something cold and heavy. Because my cameras covered my living room, my kitchen hallway, my front porch. 6 weeks of me sitting in my chair in the evenings. 6 weeks of me paying bills at the kitchen table. 6 weeks of my routine, my habits, my life, recorded and viewable by someone I didn't know. Eugene asked me what I wanted to do. I said I needed to think. He nodded. He didn't push. That's the thing about a real friend. They give you the space to land. We sat there for a while. The chili got cold. I remembered looking out the kitchen window at the backyard, at the same yard where Simone used to run through the sprinklers when she was 7 years old, and trying to understand how I had arrived at this moment. I didn't call Brendan. I know that might seem strange. The obvious thing, the instinctive thing, would be to pick up the phone and say, "What is this? Explain yourself." But something told me, the same instinct that made me read the fine print, that made me check twice before signing anything, something told me to wait, to understand what I was dealing with before I made a sound. That night, after Eugene left, I walked through the house with a different set of eyes. I looked at every corner of every room where those cameras pointed. I thought about what they could see, the kitchen table where I keep my mail, utility bills, bank statements, the envelope from my financial advisor that I'd left out for a week before opening it, the living room shelf where I keep the folder with my insurance documents, the hallway where I hang my jacket and sometimes leave my wallet on the small table by the door. I didn't sleep much. The next morning I called my nephew. His name is Patrick, and he's 31 years old and works in cybersecurity for a consulting firm in Cincinnati. I'd helped pay for part of his college. We've always been close. I told him what Eugene had found, and I asked him to come over. Patrick drove up that same evening. He spent 2 hours with the system. The hub, the app, the router logs, everything. When he came out of the back room where my router lives, his face was steady, but his eyes weren't. He told me that the secondary account had been added the same day Brendan set everything up, Father's Day, that whoever owned that account had accessed the system regularly, several times a week, sometimes daily, that the account had full administrative privileges, meaning they could not only view the cameras but export the footage to external storage. He asked me if I wanted him to find out who the account belonged to. I said yes. It took Patrick 3 days. He was careful about it, methodical. He didn't do anything illegal. He was very clear about that with me, and I was glad for it. He used the account activity data, cross-referenced some things I won't pretend to fully understand, and traced the address to an account registered under a name I didn't know. A woman, not connected to Brendan by name, but Patrick found a connection through a business registration in Indiana, a small LLC that listed both her name and Brendan's as members, an LLC I'd never heard of. I sat down again. I'm noticing I do a lot of sitting down in this story. I think that's honest. Some things don't hit you standing up. I called a man I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. His name is Roland, and he's a private investigator. I'd met him years ago through a mutual friend, back when my neighbor was having some trouble with a contractor who had taken his money and disappeared. Roland was the one who found the man. He was quiet and thorough, and he did not make promises he couldn't keep. I trusted him for those reasons. Roland met me at a coffee shop near downtown. I told him everything. I brought printouts of what Patrick had found. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he asked 2 questions. How much do you think is at stake? And how long are you willing to let this run before you act? I told him I didn't know the answer to either one yet. He said that was honest and that we'd work with it. Over the next 3 weeks, I went about my life as normally as I could manage. I kept using the app, checked the cameras the same way I always did. I didn't move anything in the house. I didn't change anything about my routine, but I had moved my important documents, quietly over the course of a few evenings, to a lockbox at my bank. My financial records, my will, the deed to the house, the beneficiary designations on my life insurance and my pension accounts. I'd also made an appointment with my estate attorney, a woman named Patricia who had handled things when my wife passed. I told her I was doing a routine review and I wanted to update a few things. She asked if everything was all right. I said I was being careful. Roland came back to me with what he'd found about 3 weeks after we first met. He'd been thorough. The LLC that Brendan and this woman had registered in Indiana, it had been set up about 14 months before Father's Day. It had no public-facing business, but there'd been 2 inquiries, through a financial broker Roland had connections with, about the potential value of property in the Columbus area. One of those inquiries had described the property in terms that matched my house almost exactly. Square footage, lot size, the year it was built. I want to be careful here about what I say, because Roland was clear with me that what he had found was suggestive, not conclusive. He told me I should not go to the police with what he had, not yet, because it wasn't enough. But he also told me that what he had was more than enough to bring to an attorney. I went back to Patricia. She sat across from me in her office and read through everything I had put in front of her. She took her time. When she finished, she looked up and said, "Arthur, I'm going to ask you something and I want you to think before you answer. Does your daughter know any of this?" I thought before I answered. I said, "I don't know." That was the hardest thing I had said out loud in a long time, because here is the part I hadn't let myself say yet. Not to Eugene, not to Patrick, not fully even to Roland. Simone was my daughter. She was part of this house, part of this family, part of every single thing I had built over 64 years, and I did not know if she was involved. I did not know if she had sat across from me at that kitchen table and smiled while knowing what her husband had put in my hallway. I did not know. Patricia told me that before I made any decisions about confronting anyone, she wanted to help me make sure I was protected. We updated the beneficiary designations on everything. We amended the will. We made sure the house was in a trust structure that would make it very difficult to do anything with it without my direct, notarized consent. She also drafted a letter, which she did not send yet, but held. A letter that documented everything, with dates, with the supporting information Roland had gathered, addressed to Brendan. Then she made one more suggestion. She told me that if I was willing, she thought I should speak to Simone, alone. Before any of this went further, I drove to her house on a Wednesday afternoon. Brendan was at work. The kids were at school. I sat in my car in her driveway for about 10 minutes before I went to the door. Simone opened it and smiled and said, "Dad, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" And I looked at my daughter, my child, who has her mother's eyes, and I said I needed to talk to her about something important. We sat at her kitchen table. I told her everything, from the Father's Day gift to Eugene's visit to Patrick's findings to Roland to Patricia's office. I laid it all out, the same way I would explain a wiring diagram. Start at the source, follow the line, show where the current went wrong. Simone didn't say anything for a long time when I finished. Then she started to cry. Not the kind of crying that's trying to get you to feel sorry for someone. The other kind. The kind that comes from somewhere real and doesn't have any strategy in it. She told me she hadn't known. She told me that about 8 months ago she had found some financial documents in the house she didn't recognize, had asked Brendan about them, and that he had told her it was an investment project with a friend and she didn't need to worry about it. She said she had believed him. She said she wished she hadn't. She asked me if I thought she'd known. I told her I hadn't known what to think. I told her that was the truth. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon. She called Brendan's phone and didn't leave a message. She called a family lawyer of her own before I left the house. The week after that, a detective with the Columbus Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit made contact with Brendan. I found out later that Roland had, through legal channels and with Patricia's help, filed a formal complaint that was detailed enough to open an inquiry. I also found out, in the weeks that followed, that the woman associated with that Indiana LLC had been part of a similar situation in another state. A different family, a different system installed in a different home, the same pattern. I'm not going to tell you that everything resolved cleanly. Real life doesn't do that. Simone and Brendan are no longer together. She made that decision herself, and I supported it without pushing her. The legal matters are still working themselves out, slowly, the way these things do. The house is still mine. My will says what I want it to say. My grandchildren still come over on Sundays, and I still make them breakfast, and the backyard still gets that good September light. But I want to tell you something that I keep coming back to. The system Brendan installed is gone now. Patrick removed it a while ago, and I have a different setup now, a simpler one, a camera on the front porch that feeds only to my phone and no one else's. But before Patrick took everything out, he showed me something. He showed me how the system had worked, what it had actually been doing all those weeks. How every motion alert, every time I walked through the kitchen hallway or sat down in my living room, had generated a data point. How my schedule, my habits, my patterns had been laid out over 6 weeks, as clearly as a blueprint. It wasn't watching for intruders. It was watching me. There's a kind of attention that comes from people who love you, and there's a kind of attention that comes from people who are building something against you. They can look identical from the outside. Someone asks how you're sleeping. Someone asks if you've seen the doctor lately. Someone sets up a system in your hallway so you feel looked after. The difference is what they do with what they learn. I'm not telling you this to make you afraid. I'm not telling you not to trust your family. Most families don't have a Brendan in them, and I'm glad for that. But I'm telling you, and I mean this for every single person watching this who has worked hard for what they have and wants to hold on to it. Know what's connected to your life. Understand who has access to it. Read the fine print. Even when someone is smiling when they hand it to you. Even when it's Father's Day and the grandkids are in the backyard and everything looks exactly the way it's supposed to look. Especially then. Because I was the careful one. And it almost wasn't enough. I've had a long time to sit with what happened. Not weeks, months. And the thing about time is that it doesn't soften the facts so much as it clarifies them. You start to see the shape of things more clearly once the shock wears off. What Brendan did wasn't a mistake. That's the part I had to make peace with first. A mistake is forgetting to mention something. A mistake is bad judgment in a moment of pressure. What he did took months of planning. There was an LLC filed in another state. There was a second account created the same afternoon. He stood in my hallway and showed me how to check the front porch camera. He smiled at me while he was doing it. He thanked me for the sweet tea. He hugged my daughter in the kitchen doorway. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. And choices have weight to them, one way or the other. I think about Eugene a lot. About the fact that he didn't come over that Tuesday with any particular agenda. He came for chili and cornbread and an afternoon with an old friend, but he was paying attention. The way a man pays attention when he spent 30 years in a field that teaches him to look at systems and ask who's running them. He didn't panic either. He just asked me a quiet question and gave me space to land. A think about what would have happened if Eugene hadn't come over, or if I'd brushed off that small, slow shake of his head, or if I'd called Brendan before I'd called Patrick, before I'd called Roland, before I'd sat across from Patricia and made sure my house was protected. I think about all the places along that chain where I could have moved too fast, or too slow, and how different things might look right now. That's the part nobody tells you about getting older. People say your instincts slow down. I don't think that's true. I think your instincts get quieter, and you have to learn to hear them better. Something in me said, wait. Something in me said, understand this. Before you make a sound. I'm glad I listened. Simone is doing well. It took a long time to fully trust that she wasn't part of it, and I want to be honest about that. Not because I'm ashamed of the doubt, but because pretending it wasn't there would be its own kind of dishonesty. She was hurt when I told her I hadn't known what to think. But she understood it. We've talked about it more than once. That conversation is one of the harder ones I've had in the last few years, and also one of the most important. The grandkids still come over on Sundays. That part didn't change. What I keep coming back to is this. Integrity is not just about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you build when nobody is. The habits, the relationships, the paper trail of your own character. Eugene came to my house because we had 40 years of showing up for each other. Patrick drove 2 hours on a weeknight because I'd been there when it mattered to him. Roland remembered me because I'd been straight with him when we first met. None of that was an accident. And Brendan, whatever he was building toward, built it on the assumption that I was too old to notice, too trusting to question, too alone to have people in my corner who would catch what I missed. That assumption was wrong. Not because I'm exceptional, but because I'd spent a lifetime doing the quiet work of being the kind of man that people drive 2 hours for on a weeknight. That's what I want you to take from this. Not fear. Not suspicion of everyone around you. Just the reminder that the most important things you protect yourself with aren't devices or passwords or locked filing cabinets. They're the relationships you've tended over decades. The reputation you've built, one honest interaction at a time. The habit of paying attention even when everything looks fine, especially when everything looks fine.